Export restrictions are kind of a strange situation because they are not actually governed, regulated at WTO level. There is no prohibition against export restrictions. There is basically nothing. So the general understanding, according let's say an old approach of lawyers, whatever is not prohibited is allowed. So theoretically, there should be no problems with this, and actually this would be confirmed, for instance, when you look at the protocol of accession of China, whereby export restrictions were actively limited for China, and that is sort of indirect confirmation of the fact that if they didn't have it into their protocol of accession, then there would be no problems. But the European Union, and particularly the European Union, is actively fighting against export restrictions, which can be in the form of export duties, as described before, but also in the form of dual pricing. So when you are making sure that your raw material somehow, with some legislation, has a different price in your domestic market and in your export market. These kind of instruments are actively fought by the European Union. There is a history about that. They started 15 years ago with specific legislation. They attempted to adopt specific legislation. They failed, and then they started fighting in the framework of anti-dumping. I will not go into detail in order to avoid people dying of boredom, but I mean, this was a main area. They lost there with Argentina at WTO level, and now they moved into subsidies. So this is an area of confrontation. This is an area where countries like Ukraine have an interest in fighting at WTO level to clarify the usability of export restrictions and the approach that we should take when we compare countries with a certain level of development with country with a different level of development. This is an important feature. We should not only distinguish between developing countries, developed countries, but we should have a clear link between the development of the economy and the types of instruments that you can use. Otherwise, you end up in the result, you end up having a certain situation, which is the situation that we have at the moment, i.e. the United States, the EU, 100 years ago, they used certain instruments. They got to a certain level of development, and now they close the door to this kind of instruments because for them, they are not needed anymore, but that's not fair. And we have to intervene at WTO level in order to make sure that, yes, there must be a fair level playing field, but fair means we apply the same conditions to the same kind of situation. That is the principle of non-discrimination under EU law. Yes, you should not discriminate, but you should also look at the actual situation of the specific country in order to decide whether an instrument can be used or not. Coming back to your actual question, the reality here is that countries are, of course, reacting. They are acting and reacting. We have more and more Canada, the EU, Turkey. Now, a country like Ukraine is a net loser in this kind of fights because they don't have yet the strength to concentrate into the domestic market. Their export markets are relatively, actually quite important. So Ukraine has an interest in trying to make sure to contribute in making sure that these confrontations are as limited as possible. So Ukraine does not have any interest in retaliate itself, in taking actions in order to, let's say, confirm the appropriateness of this approach. And going into national security, and that is my personal opinion on this, national security is a very dangerous area. It's a very dangerous area because it's an area which opens the door to unlimited and unmanageable exceptions to the WTO obligations. So now, these disputes which are going on, I personally believe that we should hope that there is no report, there is no decision by the WTO dispute resolution, because any decision would be a lose for some. If they decide that the United States cannot use national security as an exception, they will leave the WTO for good. That is for sure. I mean, there is no way that they will accept a limitation of their national security.